Audacity and authority. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. Aeron's mind went blank. This was not something he had been prepared to see. The girl grinned mischievously, clearly amused by Aeron's shock. She leaned in closer, her breath warm against his skin, and playfully brushed a lock of her hair over her shoulder. Didn't know you could fight, she teased, her voice lilting with mock surprise. I patched you up, you know. Could have sworn you were about to meet the gods. Aeron, still flustered, struggled to find his voice. Before he could respond, she continued, everyone's talking about you. How you stood up to those raiders. She straightened up on the bed and threw her arms out dramatically, mimicking one of the gruff soldiers with an exaggerated accent. I've never seen someone fight so shite, yet so effectively with a sword in me life. She adopted a ridiculous, overly serious expression, then slumped back down, unable to hold back her own laughter. Aeron couldn't help it, he burst out laughing, the absurdity of the situation completely overriding his earlier shock. The way she imitated the soldier was so ridiculous, and the idea of him being a topic of conversation was almost too much to process. The pain in his arm momentarily forgotten, he clutched his sides, shaking with laughter. The girl smiled at him, clearly pleased with herself, as she shifted her weight, still straddling his legs without a care in the world. You should have seen the way they were all talking about it. Like you're some kind of legend now, she said, her voice softer but still playful. Aeron wiped away a tear from laughing so hard, finally taking in the situation, this half-naked girl teasing him like it was the most natural thing in the world. He let out a long sigh, shaking his head, still chuckling. He muttered to himself, maybe this world is not so bad after all, I think I love this one. Aeron lay there, still grinning from the playful teasing. He glanced down at the girl, and couldn't help but marvel at his fortune. Never in 1,000 lifetimes would he have imagined himself in bed with someone as stunning as her. Especially after seeing the rough, weathered faces outside in the village. He was practically lucky beyond belief. This can't be real, he thought, shaking his head slightly. In any other world, I'd be a dead man in a stable, but here I am with her. Just as he was starting to relax, the door to his room slammed open with a thud. Aeron flinched, his heart leaping into his throat. A burly guard stormed in, eyes scanning the room before landing squarely on the half-dressed Raya. The guard's face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and rage. Raya! He bellowed, his voice booming through the small, shabby room. Raya froze, her teasing expression melting away in an instant. Her eyes widened, and she sputtered, Father. Aeron's mind blanked. Father. The girl in his lap, half naked, was the daughter of a guard. His heart sank as realization hit. What in the world? His mind screamed, but his body couldn't seem to move. The guard, now seething, took a step forward, fists clenched. His voice dripped with fury as he spat, What in the gods' name are ye doing here with this scum? His eyes, filled with disgust, flicked between Aeron and his daughter. Aeron, completely bewildered, could only stammer, what the fuck? For a moment, it looked like the guard was about to lunge at him, the tension in the air thick and dangerous. But the old man caught himself, barely holding his anger in check. With a glare that could have cut through steel, he gritted his teeth and growled, My lord is askin' for ye, his voice thick, each word a punch. Otherwise, I'd have killed ye where ye lay. Raya scrambled off Aeron, her face flushed as she pulled the covers over herself, and Aeron, still in a daze, could only stare. The guard pointed a finger at him, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. Now get a move on, he barked, stepping back toward the door, never taking his eyes off the young man. Aeron slowly sat up, still reeling. Lord Mormont is asking for me. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Of course, he thought to himself with a sigh, this is my life now. Aeron sat there for a moment, running his hand through his hair, feeling the tension hanging thick in the air. Oh, fuck it, he muttered under his breath. There wasn't much point in dragging this out. With a resigned sigh, he swung his legs out of the bed and stood up, still groggy, and reached for his ragged clothes. The guard's furious eyes bore into him as Aeron dressed slowly, pulling on his threadbare shirt and tugging at the fraying edges of his pants, not bothering to hide his smirk. The awkward silence was only broken by the soft shuffle of fabric as Aeron got himself together. The weight of the situation hit him, but he couldn't resist making it worse. Lead the way, old man, Aeron said, voice dripping with defiance, locking eyes with the guard. He then turned to Raya, flashing her a sly grin. See you around, he said with a smirk that was impossible to miss. Raya, cheeks flushed red, quickly looked away, but the smile tugging at her lips was unmistakable. The guard's fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white, a visible tremor of anger running through him. Aeron couldn't help but notice, and his grin widened. I see now. He thought, piecing it together. If Lord Mormont truly wanted me hurt, this old man wouldn't be holding back. Guess the Lord wants me unharmed then, Aeron said to the old man, feeling a flicker of amusement. He gave a slight, mock bow, adding fuel to the fire. The guard's scowl deepened, but he said nothing more. He simply turned sharply, his boots hitting the floor with heavy, deliberate steps. Aeron followed behind him, still feeling the rush of audacity coursing through his veins. The heavy thud of boots echoed down the hall as Aeron followed the guard, his steps light in contrast to the man's deliberate and sharp movements. The tension between them was palpable, but Aeron couldn't help the smirk tugging at his lips. Audacity, Aeron, he thought to himself. If nothing else, you've got that in spades. The guard stopped abruptly in front of a large wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Without knocking, he pushed it open, stepping inside and motioning for Aeron to follow. Inside the room, Lord Mormont sat at a heavy oaken table, a large map spread before him, weighted down by small stones. His armor, though worn and practical, bore the marks of countless battles. The man radiated a quiet authority, a sharp contrast to the loud and brash figures Aeron had encountered so far. Aeron stepped forward, inclining his head slightly. Lord Mormont, he greeted. The older man raised a hand to stop him. Don't, he said, his voice firm yet warm. You are a friend, boy. And friends don't stand on ceremony. Besides, I'm only Lord Mormont in the absence of Lady Lyanna Mormont. At the mention of Lyanna, Aeron's eyes widened in shock. The name struck him like a hammer, and realization dawned in an instant. Lyanna Mormont, I'm in the timeline where the War of the Five Kings is about to unfold. This changes everything. Still, he kept his composure, masking his surprise. Very well, Aeron replied simply. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. 15 comments 0 vote. First Shadow Squad. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. Lord Mormont gave Aeron a small, approving nod before gesturing to the map on the table. I want you to inform Lord Stark of what has happened here. He will see to it that this incursion is dealt with properly. You can set sail at once. Lord Eddard. Aeron asked cautiously, testing the waters. At this, Mormont let out a low chuckle, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. Of course not, boy. I wouldn't send you to King's Landing, not unless I had a death wish for you. No, I'm sending you to Winterfell. Robb Stark will receive you. The name hung in the air for a moment. Aeron allowed a faint smile to cross his lips. At once, he said with a respectful nod. Good, he thought. Now I know exactly where and when I am. Let's see how I can play this. Just as he turned to leave, something tugged at the back of his mind. He paused, turning back to face Lord Mormont. Before I go, my lord, may I ask something of you? Mormont leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Of course, friend. Anything within my power. Aeron pointed to the guard standing at the door, the same one whose daughter had been in his bed that morning. Your daughter. She's coming with me. The room went silent. The guard's face turned an alarming shade of red, and his fists clenched tightly at his sides. But Lord Mormont didn't react with anger. Instead, he studied Aeron for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and resolute. Naturally. She'll go with you. The guard's jaw dropped, his protest dying on his lips as Mormont shot him a warning glance. She'll be safer under his watch than here with us. Besides, Mormont added with a faint smirk, it's high time she saw more of the world. Perhaps Winterfell will teach her some sense. Aeron grinned, inclining his head once more. Thank you, my lord. As he left the room, Aeron allowed himself a quiet laugh. Well, this should make things interesting. Aeron sat alone in the dimly lit room he'd been given, his hands resting on the table as his mind drifted to the events of the battle. He closed his eyes, willing the system to reveal the shadow soldiers he had summoned in that desperate moment. In an instant, the faint shimmer of dark energy surrounded him, and a dozen shadowy figures materialized, kneeling before him. Each one was a warped and distorted reflection of the bodies he had extracted them from. Their forms were crude, their weapons mismatched, and their armor ill-fitting. Aeron ran a hand down his face, sighing. This isn't ideal, he muttered to himself. I extracted them randomly during the chaos. No strategy, no thought. This is inefficient. He rose from his chair, pacing as he examined the soldiers. Their presence felt unnatural, their movements disjointed and stiff. He frowned, crossing his arms. I need to organize this, he said aloud, though the shadows, of course, did not respond. I need to see the bodies. If I can choose carefully, I might be able to extract more specialized soldiers. Ones that could actually help me survive whatever madness this world throws at me. With that resolve, Aeron stepped out of his room and flagged down the first guard he saw. A broad-shouldered man with a thick beard and a perpetual scowl, the guard looked none too pleased to be stopped by him. You, Aeron called out, his tone firm. Take me to the bodies of the fallen. The guard turned, eyeing him suspiciously. Why? He asked bluntly. Aeron forced a disarming smile. I just need to see them. For personal reasons. The guard grunted, clearly unimpressed. The scum of the sea. We're about to burn them. That's all they deserve. Our fallen, on the other hand, are getting a proper burial. Aeron's eyes lit up. Brilliant. Show me where. The guard's expression darkened, his lip curling in distaste. Brilliant. He echoed, his voice thick with disdain. Burning those bastards is brilliant to you. Aeron tilted his head, meeting the man's gaze with an unnerving calm. Yes, he said simply. It's exactly what they deserve. Now, are you going to take me there, or do I need to find someone else? The guard hesitated, his stomach turning at the sheer ease with which Aeron spoke of the dead. But after a moment, he grunted and turned on his heel. Follow me, then. But don't touch anything, or you'll answer to Lord Mormont. Aeron followed, his pace steady as he silently calculated his next steps. His mind buzzed with the possibilities. If I can extract the right ones. Soldiers with skill, maybe even officers. I'll be unstoppable. As they approached the makeshift pyre, the stench of death grew stronger. The bodies of the raiders lay in a haphazard pile, their faces contorted in the grotesque stillness of death. Aeron stopped short, scanning the mound with a critical eye. The guard crossed his arms, glaring at him. There they are. Do what you need to do, but don't take too long. The fire's ready. Aeron stood near the edge of the clearing, the crackling flames of the pyre just a distant whisper. The guard who had led him there had already left, muttering something about not wanting to waste time on corpses. The area was now deserted, save for the lifeless bodies of the raiders stacked in a gruesome heap. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the faint, sickly scent of decay. He glanced around cautiously, ensuring no one was near. Satisfied, he took a deep breath and whispered, "Come out, my shadow soldiers." In a shimmer of dark energy, the ethereal forms of his soldiers appeared before him. 25 shadowy figures knelt, their twisted shapes bearing the essence of the battle they'd been pulled from. Some were solid and formidable, like the 5 shieldmen who still bore the faint silhouette of the Mormont crest on their spectral shields. Others, however, were little more than distorted remnants of the chaos, their forms clumsy and lacking refinement. Aeron frowned, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. This won't do, he muttered to himself. I need precision. Strength. Not whatever this rabble is. With a deliberate motion, he raised his hand and whispered, "Dismiss." One by one, 10 of the weaker shadow soldiers faded into nothingness, their forms dissolving into tendrils of black mist. Only the 5 shieldmen and 5 knights, hulking figures with sturdy armor and spectral blades, remained. Aeron nodded, satisfied. This is better. Focused. He turned to the pile of corpses before him, his gaze sharp. The system hummed faintly in his mind, a constant presence that felt almost alive. He extended his hand toward the bodies, his voice low but commanding. Arise. The air around him thickened, dark energy swirling like a storm. Shadows stretched and slithered from beneath the bodies, coiling around 5 particularly strong-looking pirates. Their forms twisted and reshaped, rising into ominous figures clad in the essence of the battlefield. Their weapons were crude but lethal, their presence exuding menace. Aeron's eyes flicked to the remaining bodies. Not done yet, he muttered. He scanned the pile, seeking out those that would serve his next purpose. His gaze locked onto the bodies of pirates armed with bows, archers who had fallen clutching their weapons in defiance. Arise, he commanded again, his voice ringing with authority. The shadows obeyed, weaving into the forms of 10 archers. Their bows, though spectral, looked sturdy, their arrows glinting with a dark, unnatural light. They knelt before Aeron, their forms disciplined and precise. He stepped back, surveying his new force. 5 shieldmen to protect him. 5 knights to lead a charge. 5 pirate brutes for raw power. And 10 archers for ranged precision. It was a small but formidable force, tailored for survival and dominance. Aeron smirked to himself, the faint glow of satisfaction flickering in his eyes. Now, this is how you build an army. He turned away from the pyre, his cloak billowing slightly in the cool night air. As his footfalls echoed into the quiet, one by one, the shadow soldiers melted silently into the ground, merging with his own shadow. By the time he walked away fully, there was no trace of them, only the faint, unnatural chill lingering in the air. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. 17 comments 0 vote. A Direwolf. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. The ship swayed gently as it cut through the dark, cold waters of the Bay of Ice. The moon hung high above, casting its silver light on the waves and illuminating the deck where Aeron stood, leaning casually against the ship's rail. The chill wind of the north bit at his skin, but it was nothing compared to the storm that had been raging within him since he left Bear Island. His cloak fluttered behind him, and his shadow, the one that hid so much more than it revealed, stretched long and silent under the pale light. Behind him, a familiar voice broke the quiet. By the gods, how did you manage to convince my father to let me come? Aeron turned his head to see Raya standing there, her hair catching the moonlight like flames in the dark. She was bundled in a thick cloak, though it did little to hide her sharp features or the glint of curiosity in her eyes. He chuckled, pushing off the rail to stand upright. I didn't convince him, Aeron replied, his voice calm but laced with a hint of amusement. It's just that power talks, and I knew exactly what to say. Raya narrowed her eyes playfully, a smirk tugging at her lips. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, her tone dripping with mock wisdom as she replied, power talks, does it? Is that what you Southerners say when you're spinning tales to sound clever? She dropped into a mockingly gruff, exaggerated tone. Oh, I'm Aeron Grim, a man of power and mystery. All I need is me shadowy ways to twist the great lords to my bidding. Aeron burst out laughing, shaking his head. Well, I suppose it worked, didn't it? Her smirk softened into a warm smile as her teasing faded, replaced by sincerity. She stepped closer, leaning on the railing beside him and gazing out at the endless expanse of water. In truth, though, thank you. I've always dreamed of leaving Bear Island. Not because I hated it, but there's more to see out here. More to live for than snow and pine trees. The dense trees of the wolfswood loomed overhead, their gnarled branches forming a tangled canopy that filtered the pale winter sunlight. The sound of hooves crunching through the thin layer of snow and dry leaves echoed through the still forest. The group of riders, all clad in sturdy northern gear, made their way through the winding paths with practiced ease, all except one. Aeron sat stiffly atop his horse, gripping the reins with a white-knuckled determination. His posture was awkward, his movements jerky and uncoordinated as the horse beneath him snorted and shifted. It was painfully clear to anyone watching that he was no rider. The guards accompanying him, hardened men of Bear Island, exchanged amused glances. It didn't take long before one of them, a bearded man with a broad grin, leaned toward his companion and muttered just loud enough for Aeron to hear, looks like the lad spent more time on a stick than a steed. Aeron turned to look at her, her words stirring something within him. Her earnestness reminded him of the dreams he once had in another life, a life where freedom and adventure seemed so far out of reach. Don't thank me just yet, he said, his voice quieter now, more serious. I'm not planning on going back. Not to Bear Island, not to anywhere. From now on, I'm moving forward. I'll just keep going, wherever the road takes me. It's not going to be easy, and it'll definitely be dangerous. She didn't hesitate. It doesn't matter, Raya said, her tone firm, her eyes locking with his. I'll just follow you. Aeron blinked, taken aback for a moment. But then, a small smile curved his lips. He turned back to the sea, watching the waves lap against the ship's hull. Right, he said simply, a single word carrying the weight of his acceptance. The other guard chuckled, shaking his head. Poor beast looks like it's carrying a sack of potatoes. Aeron heard every word, but his expression remained as stoic as he could manage, though his cheeks burned with embarrassment. He refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. Instead, he focused on keeping himself steady, even as his horse seemed determined to jostle him with every step. What made it worse, infinitely worse, was the sensation he felt within him. His shadow soldiers, unseen by all but him, were watching. Their presence hummed in his mind, a silent camaraderie that he normally found comforting. But now, they felt amused. He could almost sense their silent cheers and encouragement, like a group of loyal friends watching him make a fool of himself and loving every moment of it. That's right, he muttered under his breath, barely audible to anyone nearby. Cheer me on, why don't you? So helpful. Raya, riding slightly ahead, turned her head at his words. Did you say something? Nothing, Aeron replied quickly, offering a strained smile. Raya raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching as though she was holding back a comment of her own. She'd seen his struggles and, to her credit, had refrained from teasing him, at least so far. Another guard chuckled and called out, if you fall, lad, try to aim for the snow. Might soften the blow. This earned a round of laughter from the men, and even Raya couldn't suppress a small grin. Aeron sighed and muttered under his breath, I'm sure I'll have a grand audience for it, too. But even as the embarrassment lingered, he straightened his back and steadied himself. If he couldn't be good at this, he'd at least endure it with dignity, or something close to it. The shadows that swirled within him felt more amused than mocking, and despite his irritation, there was a strange comfort in knowing they were there. Laugh it up, Aeron said quietly, a smirk tugging at his lips as he glanced at the forest ahead. Let's see who's laughing when I'm the one keeping us all alive. For the first time in a long while, Aeron felt a strange sense of companionship. Not the kind he was used to, the transactional, superficial bonds of survival, but something deeper, something unspoken. The woods grew eerily quiet, save for the steady clop of hooves on the forest floor and the occasional murmurs of the guards. Aeron had just muttered his defiant words, words meant to soothe his own bruised pride, when the gods themselves seemed to answer, almost mockingly, as if to test him. A low growl rumbled through the air, breaking the uneasy silence. The horses stiffened, their ears twitching nervously. The guards immediately reached for their weapons, their laughter replaced by the tension of seasoned men sensing danger. What was that? One of the guards muttered, his voice low, his hand tightening on the hilt of his sword. Before anyone could respond, a shadow moved in the corner of Aeron's vision. Then another. And another. Shapes emerged from the dense underbrush, silent, predatory, and unmistakably wolves. But these weren't just any wolves. They were large, far larger than the ones Aeron had read about or seen in stories. Their eyes glinted like amber in the dim light, and their movements were calculated, almost intelligent. The pack encircled them, cutting off any means of escape. The guards drew their weapons, their breaths visible in the cold air as they readied for what was to come. The horses neighed and shuffled nervously, their riders struggling to keep them calm. Aeron's eyes scanned the pack, his heart pounding. But it wasn't the wolves that froze him in place, it was the creature leading them. From the shadows stepped a beast of legend, larger than any wolf he could have imagined. Its coat was a mix of silver and white, its massive paws leaving imprints in the snow-covered ground. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that sent chills down Aeron's spine. A direwolf, Aeron whispered, his breath hitching. The words left his mouth almost involuntarily, as though his mind couldn't process what he was seeing without naming it aloud. The guards exchanged wide-eyed glances, their faces pale. A direwolf. One of them stammered. Here. This far south. The massive beast let out a low growl, its ears pinned back as it regarded the group with a predator's intensity. The rest of the pack followed suit, their growls rising in a chilling chorus that seemed to echo through the forest. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. 21 comments 0 vote. Garm, the Shadow Direwolf. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And If you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. Aeron tightened his grip on his reins, his awkwardness forgotten in the face of this primal threat. He could feel his shadow soldiers stir within him, their presence a steady reassurance against the terror creeping up his spine. This is no coincidence, he muttered to himself, his mind racing. The gods are laughing at me. One of the guards raised his sword, his voice trembling as he shouted, "Back! Stay back, you beasts!" The direwolf took a step forward, its growl deepening into something more menacing. Its eyes locked onto Aeron, and for a moment, he felt as though the creature was peering into his very soul. Raya, who had been silent until now, edged her horse closer to Aeron's. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growls of the wolves. Aeron's mind worked frantically, weighing his options. He could fight, his shadow soldiers would obey his call, and the guards were skilled fighters. But to show his powers in front of these people is just not an option for now. Still, Aeron found himself remarkably calm, a sharp contrast to the flurry of tension around him. The guards gripped their weapons with white-knuckled hands, muttering prayers to their gods, but Aeron's gaze remained fixed on the direwolf. His violet eyes, glinting with an almost otherworldly intensity, locked with the burning amber of the massive beast before him. There was no mistaking it, this was no ordinary encounter. The air between them felt charged, alive with an unspoken challenge. The direwolf, towering over the other wolves, stood unmoving, its predatory eyes never leaving Aeron. It wasn't just watching him. It was studying him, assessing him as though he were an equal, or perhaps a rival. It was as if they recognized something in each other, something primal and undeniable. Predator and predator. Threat and threat. Aeron's lips curved ever so slightly into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. He spoke softly, his voice low and steady, meant more for himself than anyone else. Magnificent. The direwolf's ears twitched at the sound, but it did not back down. Its gaze burned into Aeron's, unrelenting, as if daring him to act first. Raya shifted uneasily beside him, her hand hovering over the hilt of her blade. "Aeron," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what are you doing?" He didn't answer her. His focus was unbroken, his calm almost unnerving. The guards exchanged nervous glances, one of them muttering, "The lad's gone mad." The tension snapped like a taut bowstring as Aeron grabbed the hilt of his sword, its worn leather grip grounding him in the chaos about to unfold. He leveled a calm, almost predatory gaze at the direwolf. "You," Aeron said, his voice cold and commanding, "you'll definitely be one of my soldiers now." The direwolf let out a thunderous howl, and the pack surged forward as one. The wolves ignored the guards entirely, their amber eyes locked on Aeron. The guards staggered back in shock, their weapons trembling in their hands as the pack charged at the lone man. Aeron stepped forward, unflinching, his sword held loosely at his side. "Come on, then," he muttered, his voice low but steady. His free hand rose slightly, a faint ripple of energy emanating from it as the air around him seemed to hum with unseen power. The first wolf leapt at him, jaws snapping for his throat. Aeron sidestepped with fluid precision, his blade flashing as it sliced through the wolf's flank. Blood sprayed, but Aeron was already moving, his body a whirlwind of controlled violence. Another wolf lunged from his left, but with a flick of his fingers, Aeron activated ruler's authority. A loose rock on the ground shot upward, slamming into the beast mid-air and sending it sprawling with a whimper. A third wolf tried to flank him from behind, but Aeron spun on his heel, his sword arcing in a deadly blur that cleaved through fur and flesh. The pack surrounded him, their snarls a cacophony of rage, but Aeron moved like a dancer in the midst of the chaos. His sword sang with every strike, and his hand, imbued with ruler's authority power, sent objects flying, stones, broken branches, even a discarded shield crushing or deflecting wolves that came too close. One wolf managed to clamp its jaws onto his arm, its teeth sinking into his sleeve. Aeron gritted his teeth, but instead of panicking, he used ruler's authority to wrench the beast off him, flinging it into another wolf with bone-crunching force. The guards watched in stunned silence, their weapons forgotten in their hands. The sight before them was unlike anything they had ever witnessed, a single man, holding his ground against a pack of wolves with a combination of brutal swordsmanship and eerie, magic power. By the time the last wolf fell, Aeron stood amidst the carnage, his ragged clothes soaked with blood. He was breathing hard, but his grip on his sword was steady as he turned his gaze to the direwolf. The massive beast growled, its lips pulling back to reveal razor-sharp teeth. It didn't charge immediately, as though it, too, was assessing Aeron. Aeron smirked, raising his sword and pointing it directly at the direwolf. Your pack's gone. It's just you and me now. The direwolf charged, its powerful legs kicking up dirt as it barreled toward him like a freight train. Aeron didn't retreat. Instead, he sprinted forward to meet the beast head-on. At the last second, the direwolf leapt, its massive jaws snapping for Aeron's throat. Aeron ducked low, sliding beneath the beast and slashing upward as he passed, his blade leaving a deep gash along its side. The direwolf whirled, its movements surprisingly agile for its size. It lunged again, its claws raking the ground as Aeron jumped back. With a flick of his hand, a shattered spearhead from the ground flew toward the beast's face, but the direwolf batted it aside with a snarl. Their battle became a blur of movement, Aeron's sword clashing against the direwolf's claws and fangs. Despite its injuries, the direwolf fought with relentless ferocity, and Aeron found himself pushed to his limits. Finally, the direwolf charged again, its speed and power leaving no room to dodge. Aeron waited until the last possible moment, then leapt upward, using ruler's authority to propel himself higher. The direwolf's jaws snapped shut just beneath him as he landed on its back. The beast bucked wildly, trying to throw him off, but Aeron held on, his free hand gripping the thick fur at the back of its neck. With a roar, he raised his sword high, the blade gleaming in the fading light. Let's end this. He shouted, driving the sword downward with all his strength. The blade pierced the direwolf's neck, sinking deep into muscle and bone. The beast let out a final, guttural howl before collapsing to the ground, its body shuddering once before going still. Aeron stepped off the beast, his sword still buried in its neck. His chest heaved as he looked down at the fallen direwolf, blood dripping from his blade. The guards were silent, their faces pale as they stared at him. One of them finally found his voice. What are you? Aeron didn't answer. He simply pulled his sword free, wiped it clean on the direwolf's fur, and sheathed it. As Aeron stood over the direwolf's massive corpse, blood still dripping from his blade, a faint chime echoed in his ears. System notification. You leveled up. You leveled up. You leveled up. Another notification flashed before him. New item obtained. Direfang. Type: sword. Rarity: rare. Stats: attack power, +25. Bonus, +10% damage against beasts. Durability, 150/150ths. Special effect, Beast's Roar, has a chance to unleash a fear-inducing howl that weakens enemies within a 10-meter radius. Aeron glanced at the weapon in his inventory but paid it little mind. It was a good sword, no doubt, but his attention was elsewhere. A far more important notification caught his eye. System notification. Shadow Army limit increased to 30. He smirked to himself, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew exactly what to do. Aeron stepped onto the direwolf's massive body, the lifeless eyes of the beast staring into nothingness. Raising his hand. Arise, Aeron commanded, his voice calm but laced with undeniable authority. The shadows surged upward, enveloping the direwolf's body in an inky mist. The process was slower than with the smaller wolves, as if the beast's immense spirit resisted the transformation. But then, with a sound like a guttural growl from the abyss, the shadowy form of the direwolf emerged. The creature was even more imposing in its shadow form. Its fur was now a shifting mass of black and dark purple energy, its eyes glowing a malevolent crimson. It stood taller than before, its presence radiating raw power and dominance. Aeron stepped back slightly to admire his work, the faintest hint of a smile playing on his lips. He looked into the glowing red eyes of the shadowy beast and said, "From now on, you are Garm." The shadow direwolf lowered its massive head, as if acknowledging its master. Its growl was deep, reverberating through the ground beneath Aeron's feet. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. Winterfell. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. The guards, still frozen in shock, could barely comprehend what they were witnessing. One of them muttered, that thing is unnatural. Aeron turned to them, his smirk returning. He's mine now. As if on cue, Garm turned his massive head toward the guards and let out a low, menacing growl. The men flinched, but Aeron waved a hand dismissively. Relax. He won't harm you. Not unless I tell him to. The guards exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing more. Aeron turned back to Garm and gave the shadow beast a small nod. With that, Garm faded into the shadows beneath Aeron's feet, merging seamlessly with his master's own shadow. Aeron stood tall, wiping the sweat from his brow. His purple eyes glinted with determination as he sheathed his sword. Let's move, he said to the guards, his voice steady. We've wasted enough time here. Aeron turned to face the guards, his gaze sharp and unyielding. His voice dropped, cold and deadly. If any of you speak a word of what you saw here today, I'll kill you and your entire bloodline. Is that clear? The weight of his words pressed down on the group like a physical force, leaving no room for defiance. At first, the guards didn't respond, their faces pale and frozen in shock. But then a low, guttural growl emanated from beneath Aeron's shadow, a sound so feral and menacing that it sent shivers down their spines. One guard stammered, "Oh, of course, my lord." The others quickly chimed in, nodding frantically. "Yes, my lord." Aeron's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Very well." He glanced down at the shadow beneath him and whispered, "Thanks, Garm." The growling ceased as if on command, the silence that followed more unnerving than the sound itself. Raya, still seated on her horse, stared at Aeron with wide eyes. Her face was a mixture of disbelief and awe. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. Noticing her expression, Aeron approached her, his tone softening. "You're okay." Raya blinked and shook her head slightly, as if snapping herself out of a trance. You're a sorcerer, aren't you? When did you learn to do all that?" Aeron scratched the back of his head, a sheepish grin replacing his usual smirk. "It's complicated," he said, his tone almost apologetic. "But don't ask me any questions about it. Just know this, I'll keep us safe." Raya studied him for a moment, her gaze searching his face for any sign of doubt. But there was none. Aeron's confidence was steady, unshaken. Finally, she nodded, her lips curling into a small smile. "You'd better. Because I'm not going back to Bear Island." Aeron chuckled, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword. "Don't worry. Neither am I." With that, he mounted his horse, casting one last glance at the pyre behind them. The guards silently followed his lead, their fear palpable but their loyalty now undeniable. Raya kept close to Aeron's side, her curiosity simmering just beneath the surface as they rode deeper into the wolfswood. Aeron caught his first glimpse of Winterfell, and his breath hitched in his throat. The great stone fortress loomed in the distance, its gray walls as steadfast and immovable as the north itself. Towering battlements crowned the keep, and the stark banners, a gray direwolf racing across an icy white field, fluttered in the wind, proud and unyielding. It was a sight Aeron had dreamed of but never imagined he'd see with his own eyes. He had read about Winterfell in countless tales, imagined its towering walls and the warmth of its great hearths, but reality far surpassed his expectations. The keep looked ancient yet enduring, its stones weathered by centuries of harsh winters. Smoke rose from the chimneys, carrying the scent of hearth fires, and the sound of life within the castle walls reached Aeron even from this distance, horses neighing, men shouting orders, and the faint hum of everyday work. Aeron slowed his horse, taking in the sight. His violet eyes traced every detail, from the gatehouse to the imposing great hall that jutted above the rest of the keep. For a moment, he forgot the cold bite of the northern air, the ache in his muscles from days of travel, and even the ominous shadow that lingered beneath him. He was here. Winterfell. Raya rode up beside him, her own expression a mixture of awe and curiosity. "By the gods," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "It's bigger than I imagined." Aeron nodded, though he barely registered her words. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the historical grandeur of this place with the reality he now faced. "It's magnificent," he murmured, almost to himself. "Stark lands. Stark legacy. I never thought I'd stand here." They approached the main gates, flanked by towering watchtowers. Guards atop the walls looked down, their expressions curious but wary. The heavy iron gates groaned as they opened, revealing the bustling courtyard within. Winterfell was alive with activity, stable hands tending to horses, blacksmiths hammering steel, and the ever-present sound of voices shouting orders or exchanging banter. The captain of the Winterfell guard stepped forward, his fur-lined cloak billowing slightly in the breeze. "Who goes there?" he demanded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Aeron dismounted, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. He straightened, his shadow stretching long behind him in the afternoon sun. "Aeron Grim," he announced. Sent by Lord Mormont of Bear Island to deliver a message to the Warden of the North. The captain's eyes flickered with recognition at the mention of Mormont, and he nodded. You'll be granted an audience with Lord Robb Stark. Follow me. The group was ushered through the courtyard, drawing curious glances from those around them. Aeron couldn't help but notice how starkly different the people here looked compared to those on Bear Island, well-fed, better clothed, and with an air of confidence that came from living under the protection of the Starks. As they entered the great hall, Aeron's eyes were drawn to the massive hearth at its center, the flames crackling and casting a warm glow over the stone walls. Above it hung the sigil of House Stark, the direwolf etched in iron, a silent reminder of the family's power and legacy. At the far end of the hall sat Robb Stark, the young wolf himself. He looked younger than Aeron had imagined but carried himself with the authority of a man who had seen battle and borne responsibility beyond his years. His auburn hair was cropped short, and his piercing gray eyes seemed to assess Aeron even before a word was spoken. Beside him stood Maester Luwin and a few advisors, their faces etched with curiosity. Aeron approached, his boots echoing against the stone floor. He stopped a respectful distance away and inclined his head. My lord, he said, his voice steady. Robb Stark rose from his seat, a faint smile playing on his lips. No need for formalities. If my bannerman trusted you enough to send you here, then you're a friend of Winterfell. Aeron straightened, his expression neutral despite the weight of Robb's words. Friend of Winterfell. He allowed the phrase to settle in his mind. Thank you, my lord. Robb gestured to a servant, who stepped forward with a tray of wine. You've traveled far. Rest, eat, and drink. But first, tell me what news from Bear Island. As Aeron relayed the details of the pirate raid and his role in repelling the attack, Robb listened intently, his brow furrowing at times. When Aeron finished, Robb leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You've done the North a great service, he said finally. And I trust Mormont's judgment in sending you. We'll send men to Bear Island at once, and I'll inform Lord Father of this matter in King's Landing. Winterfell will always be a place of safety for those loyal to the Starks. Aeron's brow furrowed slightly as he absorbed Robb Stark's words. Lord Father, King's Landing. He repeated, feigning ignorance. He wanted to gauge the young wolf's response, see what is exactly going on in the world at the moment. Maester Luwin, ever the scholar, chimed in immediately. My lord, he said with a somewhat dismissive tone, this man is of lowborn origin. He likely doesn't know of such matters. Aeron smirked to himself, silently amused by the maester's bluntness. He could already tell that Luwin was the type of man who preferred logic over personal pride. The man probably thought nothing of Aeron's lowborn status, seeing only his utility in the larger game of politics. Robb took the bait. His gaze remained steady as he turned toward Aeron, answering truthfully. My father serves as Hand of the King in King's Landing, Robb said, his voice firm. He will handle matters of state in the capital, but as for the situation at sea, we'll send men to Bear Island, and Winterfell will see to it that our allies are protected. Aeron's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, the pieces falling into place. So the war is yet to start and Eddard is alive and well, this is the piece of information that I truly wanted. Aeron thought to himself. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. 16 comments 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. FrenzyAren. Download app now. Aeron's choice. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. The night was calm, Winterfell bathed in the cold silver glow of the moon. Aeron walked through the quiet courtyard, his breath visible in the crisp air. The torches along the walls flickered against the stone, casting long shadows. He moved without purpose, simply letting his thoughts wander, his gaze shifting over the castle that had stood for thousands of years. His eyes lingered on the figures in the distance, children, but important ones. Rickon, barely more than a babe, stumbling along with his direwolf, Shaggy Dog. Bran, crippled, sitting on the steps with his wolf at his side. Even the exile, Theon Greyjoy, laughing too loud near a fire. These were the players of a story he already knew. Aeron exhaled slowly. Should I warn Robb? He wondered. Would he believe a stranger? A lowborn with no name, no house. Politics in this world was dangerous. The Game of Thrones swallowed men whole, and Aeron had no intention of playing for someone else. Beside him, Raya's voice broke through his thoughts. You've been quiet for a while, she said, her piercing northern accent softer than usual. Something on your mind? Aeron turned to her. Yes, but. He stopped. Something was wrong. A person was missing. His eyes scanned the guards stationed nearby, the ones who had traveled with him from Bear Island. One was gone. His gut twisted. In a place like Winterfell, a man disappearing in the dead of night meant only one thing. Aeron turned to Raya, his expression unreadable. Have you seen him? She frowned. No. Why? His answer was a single word. Garm. The shadows beneath him stirred, the ink-like darkness shifting as something enormous rose from its depths. Garm, his towering direwolf, materialized silently, his eyes glowing like burning coals. The beast stretched, his black fur rippling like smoke, before lowering his head in waiting. Aeron placed a hand on Garm's massive head. Find him. The wolf gave a deep, rumbling growl before vanishing into the night. He was faster than any normal beast, moving like a ghost between the trees, unseen and unheard. Raya shivered beside him, watching the display in silence. She still wasn't used to it, the things she had seen Aeron do. The wait didn't last long. Garm returned within hours, stepping into the light of the torches, his massive form casting a terrifying silhouette against the walls of Winterfell. Aeron smiled at what he saw. Hanging from Garm's maw, clutched between dagger-like teeth, was a severed head, its face twisted in shock, its eyes still open in death. Raya recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. 7 hells. Aeron reached out, gripping the dead man's hair, lifting the head to inspect it. So that's where you were going. He chuckled darkly and looked into the lifeless eyes. Good job, Garm, he murmured. Then, shifting his gaze back to the night, his expression hardened. The bastard was heading south. Aeron let the severed head to Garm to finish off. His expression was unreadable as he stared down at the snowy floor, his mind already working through the implications. This is my mistake, he muttered to himself, his voice low, almost begrudging. I can't be sure he didn't speak to someone before I found him. Should it matter? I don't know, but I can't take that risk. The flickering torchlight cast shifting shadows across his face, his purple eyes reflecting something deeper, calculation, resolve. He exhaled slowly. I know where to go now. Raya, still shaken, looked at him in confusion. What do you mean? Go where? Aeron turned away, his gaze lifting toward the distant, unseen north. He wasn't concerned with the war, with banners rising and falling. That was the struggle of men. But beyond the wall, there was something else, something far older, something unnatural. I couldn't care less for the war at the moment, he said, his tone firm. My army is small, but an invincible one. And in the north, beyond the wall, there is another like me. A foe made of ice and death. His fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword. I'll head there. Morning came draped in a cold mist, the kind that clung to the skin and seeped into the bones. Aeron had planned to slip away quietly, unnoticed, before the weight of Winterfell's hospitality could tie him down. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As he made his way through the courtyard, adjusting the straps of his sword belt, his sharp eyes caught sight of a man clad in black. The worn leather and faded wool marked him immediately, a brother of the Night's Watch. The man stood tall but weary, his face lined with hardship. He spoke urgently with Robb Stark, who listened intently, his expression unreadable. Aeron didn't hesitate. He approached, his footsteps light but deliberate. You ask for reinforcements, he said, cutting through their conversation as he came to stand beside them. The man of the watch turned to him, studying him warily. Robb, on the other hand, was taken aback. His brows furrowed. He answered, glancing back at the black-cloaked man. There have been troubling reports from the wall. This man brings word from Lord Commander Mormont himself. He requests men from the north. Aeron nodded, absorbing the information. Then, casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he spoke. Let me go with him. Silence. Robb stared at him, stunned. What? The man of the Night's Watch blinked, clearly not expecting that response either. You wish to accompany me. Do you understand where it is I go? Aeron smirked. The wall. Beyond it, even. That's my destination. Robb's expression darkened slightly, as if he were trying to decipher a riddle. He exchanged glances with his guards before focusing back on Aeron. You do realize men don't choose to go to the wall unless they have no other choice, right? And even fewer would willingly go beyond it. Aeron simply shrugged. And yet, here I am. The man in black regarded him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. You wish to take the black, then? Aeron chuckled. No, I have no interest in swearing oaths. His voice held an amused edge. But I do have my own reasons for heading north. So I ask again, let me travel with you. Robb folded his arms, studying him for a long moment. He was trying to make sense of this man before him, this lowborn fighter whom Mormont himself trusted, who had bested an entire raider crew and walked Winterfell's halls with quiet confidence. He wasn't sure what game Aeron was playing, but he knew one thing: he wasn't dealing with an ordinary man. Finally, Robb let out a breath and shook his head with a slight smirk. I won't pretend to understand why you'd want to freeze your ass off beyond the wall, but, if you truly wish to go, I won't stop you. His expression grew more serious. Just know this, Aeron, whatever dangers you think you'll find out there, the truth is worse. Aeron simply smiled. Good. Then I suppose I'll see for myself. Aeron's skin as he stood near the stables, his gaze locked onto Raya, who looked at him with suspicion. He was planning something. Something she wouldn't like. You're leaving, she stated flatly, crossing her arms. Aeron sighed. I have too. Raya scoffed. Why am I not surprised? And let me guess, you want me to stay behind, don't you? He nodded. Winter is coming, and so is war. The entire realm is going to become a battleground, and I know what the future holds. If you come with me, I can't promise your safety in the far north. Raya's glare was sharp. And what makes you think I care about safety? I chose to follow you, Aeron. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Aeron exhaled slowly, stepping closer. And I won't let you throw that away. If you stay in Winterfell, you'll have a safe place. Here, you can prove yourself, make connections, and keep me informed. But if you come with me beyond the wall, you might never return. She clenched her fists, frustration clear on her face. And what about you? Aeron smirked. I'm not planning on dying, if that's what you're asking. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice softening. Trust me. I'll be back. I just need to get something from beyond the wall, and by the time I return, Winterfell will probably be a different place. A hostile one, but you'll be safe. Raya hesitated, searching his face for any deception. You promise? I do. She looked away, biting her lip, then exhaled in defeat. Fine. But if you don't come back, I swear I'll drag you out of whatever hell you end up in. Aeron chuckled. I'll hold you to that. As he turned to leave, his eyes darkened for a brief moment. In the shadows behind her, unseen by anyone but him, one of his shadow soldiers silently merged with her own shadow, disappearing into it completely. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon ad. Web links. 18 comments, 0 vote. Castle Black. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon ad. Web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. The cold bit deep. Even through thick furs and layered cloaks, the chill seeped into Aeron's bones like an old curse. The road to the wall was long, the trees of the Wolfswood thinning with every passing mile, giving way to the open, frost-laden lands of the north. The men of the Night's Watch escorting him were not the friendly sort. Hardened by exile and duty, they treated strangers with the same warmth as the icy winds that battered them. A few rode ahead, their hands never straying far from their swords. The rest kept Aeron in their periphery, like a pack of wolves unsure if they were walking with prey or a predator. One of them, a grizzled man with a missing ear, finally broke the silence. You're an odd one, lad. Most who come this way ain't got a choice. You're the first I've seen in years that walks willingly into the cold. Well, the second. Makes a man wonder, what are you running from? Aeron smirked, shaking off the frost from his cloak. If I were running, why the hell would I be heading to the wall? There's no escape from that place. The man chewed on that for a moment before spitting into the snow. A fair point. Still, the air remained heavy with suspicion, and Aeron knew their doubts wouldn't vanish overnight. Castle Black was a fortress of stone and wood, ancient yet worn by time. The walls stood tall, but not as imposing as the monstrous wall itself, an icy behemoth stretching endlessly into the sky. Aeron had read about it, seen it in visions of another life, but nothing could compare to standing before it in the flesh. The banners of the Night's Watch flapped in the wind as they rode through the gates. Black-clad men moved about with purpose, some sparring in the yard, others hauling supplies. Their faces were a mixture of criminals, exiles, and broken men, some hardened, some still clinging to who they once were. Aeron was led straight to Jeor Mormont, the Lord Commander himself. The old bear sat by the fire in the main hall, his heavy fur cloak draped over his broad shoulders. He glanced up as Aeron entered, his sharp eyes studying him with interest. So, Jeor rumbled, what's this then? Another stray pup. Aeron met his gaze without hesitation. I was sent by the Lord of Winterfell as reinforcement. For a moment, silence. Then, the old bear laughed, a deep, hearty sound that filled the hall. Ha! That's rich. Reinforcements, is it? From a single lowborn lad. You must think me a fool. Aeron only shrugged. I don't think anything, Lord Commander. I go where I'm needed. Jeor's eyes lingered on him before he stood. All right, then. If Winterfell trusts you, let's see if you're worth your weight in steel. Pick a sword. Aeron arched a brow. What for? Jeor turned toward the training yard and called out, Snow. The name sent a jolt through Aeron. He knew who would answer that call. And sure enough, Jon Snow emerged from the barracks, dressed in black, longclaw strapped to his back. His face was sharp, pale from the cold, and his dark curls were damp with sweat from training. It's actually him, Aeron thought to himself, suppressing the strange feeling of recognition. Jon approached, his expression unreadable. Your opponent, Jeor said simply, gesturing toward Aeron. Jon frowned, glancing between them. Him. He's not even sworn to the watch. Even better, we won't feel sorry if he ends up dying here. Jon exhaled through his nose, then nodded. All right, then. Aeron grabbed a sword from the rack, testing the weight. He turned to Jon and smirked. I never expected to spar with you of all people. Jon's lips twitched, but he didn't bite. Instead, he stepped into the yard, rolling his shoulders. The crowd gathered, eager for a distraction from their usual routine. They exchanged looks, both at the ready, wasting no time. Jon moved first, his footwork precise, his blade swift. Aeron barely had time to bring his sword up before steel met steel in a sharp clang. The force of the impact sent a jolt up his arms. Jon didn't hesitate, he pressed forward, each strike faster, sharper, relentless. He wasn't just skilled. He was a natural, molded by years of training. Aeron was forced on the defensive, barely managing to parry the onslaught. Sparks flew from their blades, breath misting in the cold air as they clashed again and again. The gathered brothers of the watch watched with keen interest, murmuring among themselves. Jon was better. That much was clear. But Aeron had something else. Ruler's authority. As Jon went for a downward slash, Aeron barely sidestepped, extending his hand without touching him. Jon's wrist jerked, just slightly, throwing off his balance. It was subtle, nearly imperceptible, but Aeron saw it in Jon's eyes, the flicker of confusion. Aeron took advantage, pushing forward with sudden aggression. He twisted his grip, parried hard, and sent Jon stumbling back. Jon recovered quickly, but now there was something different in his expression. He knew something was off. Aeron grinned. Getting tired, Snow? Jon didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted his stance, and lunged. Aeron countered, but this time, he didn't rely solely on his sword. With a subtle flick of his fingers, he shifted a stone beneath Jon's boot. Jon tripped. Only slightly. But it was enough. Aeron stepped in, blade to his throat before Jon could recover. Silence. Jon stared at the blade, his chest rising and falling. His grip on his sword tightened, then loosened. He stepped back, exhaling heavily. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some were impressed. Others skeptical. Jeor Mormont stroked his beard. HMPH. That was something. Jon wiped his brow, eyeing Aeron carefully. You're fast. Aeron smiled. You're better. I just cheat sometimes, you see. Jon laughed, shaking his head. I'll have to learn a few things from you then. Jeor chuckled. Not bad, lad. Not bad at all. But don't get too comfortable. We're not in the business of handing out victories. The real test is yet to come. Aeron sheathed his sword, his mind already turning. The hall of Castle Black was dimly lit, the fire at its center flickering against the stone walls. The night was bitterly cold, the kind that crept into a man's bones and refused to leave. Aeron sat with a cup of watered-down ale in his hands, barely sipping from it as the gathered black brothers exchanged murmured conversations. Then, Jeor Mormont's voice cut through the room like a blade. "We're planning a ranging beyond the wall," he announced, his gravelly tone leaving no room for debate. "Too many missing rangers. We need to find out what's happening in the far north. Those who ride with us will be tested, not just by the cold, but by whatever's out there." A silence settled over the room. Beyond the wall was a place only fools and dead men took lightly. Aeron leaned forward, tapping a finger against the rim of his cup. This was it. This was his chance. "I'll go," he said without hesitation. A few men snorted, others laughed outright. "The hell you will," one of them, a thick-bearded ranger with a scar running down his cheek chuckled. "You think just 'cause you won a spar against Snow, you're fit to ride beyond the wall." Aeron met his gaze, unimpressed. "I think I'd last longer out there than you." Another brother, younger but with sharp eyes, smirked. "I. And what makes you so confident, lowborn? The gods whisper in your ear." Aeron smirked back. "Something like that." The bearded ranger grunted, shaking his head. "Boy, the things beyond that wall aren't just bandits and outlaws. It's the cold. It's the things you don't see, till they're upon you. A pretty sword won't save you when the wind freezes your cock off." Aeron just took another sip of ale. "Good thing I'm not planning on losing my cock, then." Laughter rippled through the room at that, though some still eyed him with doubt. Jeor watched the exchange with mild amusement before speaking. "You bested Snow, and you've got no fear in your eyes. That's more than I can say for some. You'll accompany us either way." Some men grumbled at that. Others simply nodded, accepting Jeor's decision. Aeron set his cup down and stood, stretching his arms. "Good," he said, rolling his shoulders. "That's the only reason why I came here anyways," Aeron thought to himself. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. 15 comments 0 vote. Aeron vs. the Dead. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. The Rangers ventured beyond the wall and the haunted forest stretched before them, an endless maze of twisting, skeletal trees draped in frost. The silence was eerie, too quiet, even for this place. The only sound was the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the distant howling of the wind. The men of the Night's Watch moved cautiously, their hands gripping their weapons as their breath curled in the icy air. Aeron felt it before he saw anything. Aeron's eyes narrowed, a chill creeping down his spine that wasn't from the cold wind. He felt it before he even saw anything, an oppressive, suffocating presence, like a dark cloud rolling over his senses, blotting out everything else. The notification appeared in his mind, bright and impossible to ignore. Quest: kill the minions of the false monarch of death. Objective: eliminate the whites under the control of the false monarch. Rewards: Aeron's grip tightened around his sword hilt, his heart pounding. False monarch of death. The Night King, I assume, Aeron thought to himself. That creeping sensation of something watching them only kept growing. A presence hidden in the cold darkness, ancient and malevolent. His purple eyes scanned the trees, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. That's gotta be him, or one of his walkers. Beside him, Jon Snow noticed his unease. You seem worried. Aeron didn't take his eyes off the darkness ahead. You could say that, especially since there is something approaching us right now. Jon's hand went to his sword immediately. What? Before Aeron could respond, the shadows shifted. From the trees, figures emerged, pale, twisted, and wrong. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if they had long forgotten what it meant to be human. Their eyes glowed a deathly blue, empty yet filled with hunger. Whites. One of the rangers shouted, panic creeping into his voice. Then, the dead charged. The trees shook, branches snapping like brittle bones. Then, they appeared, figures that should not be moving. Whites. Half-rotted, frost-bitten corpses, clad in the tattered remains of armor and furs. Hollow, glowing blue eyes locked onto the living with eerie purpose. They made no sound beyond the crunch of their stiff limbs against the frozen ground. Then, they charged. Form up. Jeor Mormont's voice bellowed across the clearing. The rangers barely had time to draw steel before the dead were upon them. Aeron reacted instantly. The first white lunged for him, its skeletal fingers clawing at his throat. He twisted his body, dodging the attack by inches, and brought his sword down in a sharp, merciless arc. Steel met frozen flesh. The white's arm was severed, but it did not falter. It kept coming. They don't feel pain. Aeron clicked his tongue. Annoying. He sent his boot crashing into its chest, kicking it backward. To his left, a ranger screamed as a white buried its jagged fingers into his stomach, tearing out steaming innards. Another watchman swung his sword desperately, hacking wildly. Jon, meanwhile, moved like a whirlwind. Longclaw sang through the air, carving through two whites in rapid succession. One tried to tackle him from behind. Before Aeron could warn him, Ghost lunged, his massive white form slamming into the white and tearing its throat out with a savage snarl. Jon turned to Aeron, chest rising and falling. We can't let them overwhelm us. Then let's clear the field. A white, missing half its face, lurched toward Aeron. Its blackened teeth gnashed mindlessly. He didn't dodge. Instead, he caught the white midair, not with his hands, but with his will. The air pulsed. The white froze mid-lunge, its body suspended inches away from Aeron. Ruler's authority. Aeron twisted his fingers, the unseen force ripping the white in half. Its spine cracked like a branch, and its body collapsed into the snow. Several rangers stopped fighting just to stare at him. Jon saw it, too. What the hell was that? Aeron didn't answer. He was already moving. He grabbed his sword and slashed through another white, its head flying into the air, only for the decapitated corpse to keep moving. It clawed at him, fingers tightening around his wrist. Its severed head lay in the snow, jaw snapping open and shut as if still trying to bite him. Aeron narrowed his eyes. Looking at them closely like this is disturbing. Then, a thought struck him, arise. He whispered. His powers, stretching unnaturally toward the white's corpse. But instead of the familiar sensation of his power claiming the dead, a notification flashed before his eyes. Target has been dead for too long. Target is under the influence of another power. Aeron's grip on his sword tightened. So, there is someone that can make my life difficult here after all, Aeron thought to himself. Jon hacked another white in half and turned to him, breathing heavily. What are these things? Aeron exhaled, watching the cold mist of his breath rise into the frozen air. Trouble, he muttered. Serious trouble. The battle raged on, but Aeron had learned something important today. His power had limits. And worse, there was another force in this world capable of challenging it. The fight raged on. The scent of decay and frozen blood filled the air, mixing with the heavy breath of exhausted men. The rangers fought with everything they had, hacking and slashing at the whites, but for every one that fell, another took its place. Aeron gritted his teeth as he drove his blade into a white's chest, only for it to keep moving, its lifeless fingers clawing at his arm. He yanked his sword free and severed its head, but even then, the body twitched in the snow. Damn it. He raised his voice over the chaos. You have to burn them. Valyrian steel works as well, and dragonglass other than that, we're just chopping them apart for no reason. Jon, struggling against a white, barely had time to respond. Longclaw cleaved through the creature's neck with ease, and this time, it stayed down. His breath was heavy, but his eyes flicked to Aeron. You're right. I don't have a problem with them. Aeron swung his blade again, sending a white's arm flying before stomping its skull into the ice. Good. That means you're the only one here who can cut them down properly. The rest of us have to set the bastards on fire. Aeron exhaled sharply, glancing at the whites still twitching in the snow. Their severed limbs crawled like insects, fingers grasping for weapons, jaws snapping even as their heads lay separated from their bodies. The rangers were still catching their breath, their faces pale from exhaustion and horror. Some clutched their swords with white-knuckled grips, others exchanged uneasy glances, as if waiting for the next wave. Aeron rolled his shoulders, flexing his fingers as he sighed. Ah, fuck it. Without another word, he raised his hand. The air around him pulsed. An invisible force seized the whites, their lifeless forms jerking unnaturally. Then, with a single motion of his fingers, he clenched his fist. The whites exploded. Rotted flesh, brittle bones, and frozen limbs shattered into smaller pieces, scattering across the snow like splintered wood. A silence followed, thick and suffocating, as every single man turned to stare at Aeron. Blood and ichor dripped from his face and armor, but he barely seemed to notice. He dusted off his hands and muttered, "There. Now we don't have to do anything else." The rangers stood frozen, jaws slack, eyes wide with disbelief. What in the fuck was that? One finally blurted out. Another took a hesitant step back, gripping his sword tighter. Gods above. Even Jon was staring, his expression unreadable. His sword hand twitched, as if unsure whether to sheath Longclaw or keep it ready. Aeron only smirked, rolling his shoulders. What? It worked, didn't it? The silence stretched for a moment longer before Jeor Mormont finally broke it. The old bear let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Well, lad, he said gruffly. We'll have a long discussion. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. 18 comments 0 vote. The Monarch's Servants. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at web links. You can get access to 3 more chapters or 7 more chapters if you want. The fire crackled in the heart of the camp, its warmth barely holding back the biting cold of the north. The night stretched endlessly above them, the sky dark and empty, as if the gods themselves had turned their gaze elsewhere. Aeron sat apart from the others, leaning against a frost-covered log, his breath curling in the frigid air. His fingers traced absent-mindedly over the hilt of his sword, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The feeling was gone. No unseen eyes bore into his back, no unnatural presence lurked just beyond his senses. Whatever had been watching them before had withdrawn, or perhaps, was never truly there in the first place. Whites, but no walkers. That alone was strange. He would have expected more, unless they were waiting. His jaw tightened slightly. Are they wary of me? The thought gnawed at him. He should have been relieved that nothing more had come. Instead, frustration prickled under his skin. It would be nice to finish him off now, but if I go deeper, the cold alone could kill me. And I have no idea where that bastard might be. He exhaled slowly, shaking the thought away. No sense in dwelling on it now. The men of the watch were scattered around the camp, some sharpening weapons, others nursing wounds. Their movements were slower than before, more hesitant. He could see the glances they cast his way when they thought he wasn't looking. They didn't trust him. Not that he blamed them. A heavy thud pulled him from his thoughts. Jeor Mormont had settled himself on a stump nearby, arms crossed over his broad chest, his eyes sharp despite his age. He studied Aeron for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. Now, lad, Jeor finally said, his voice low and firm. What the hell was that? Aeron met his gaze, lifting a brow. What was what? Jeor snorted. Don't play dumb with me, boy. You know damn well what I'm talking about. That wasn't swordplay, nor anything I've seen in all my years on the wall. So, tell me. What are you? Some kind of sorcerer? Blood magic? Dark magic? His accent thickened as he spoke, the northern suspicion seeping into every word. Around them, a few of the rangers had gone quiet, listening. Aeron only smiled, tilting his head slightly. I learned it in Essos. It was a lie. A blatant one. Jeor let out a low hum, not looking entirely convinced but not pressing the matter either. Figured as much, he grunted. That place is the source of all sorts of shit. Wouldn't surprise me if you picked up something foul over there. Jon, who had been listening in silence, stepped closer and clapped a hand on Aeron's shoulder. So that's how you won against me. Aeron smirked, rolling his shoulders. I did say I cheated. Jon let out a huff, shaking his head with a half-smile before returning to his seat. The conversation drifted after that, but the tension never truly left. Even as the fire burned low and exhaustion pulled at the men, Aeron could feel the weight of their gazes. They feared him. Respected him, perhaps, but mostly feared him. The fire had burned low, embers crackling softly beneath the weight of the cold northern air. Most of the men had settled into an uneasy rest, but Jeor Mormont remained standing, ever watchful. He turned to his men and spoke with the gravelly authority that only came with years of command. We move at first light. Aeron stood from his spot near the fire, rolling his shoulders as he stepped closer. We're heading to Craster's first, then. Jeor turned his gaze on him, bushy brows lifting slightly. Of course. He paused, tilting his head. Strange that you know that. His lips curled in a dry chuckle. Is that magic as well? Aeron only smirked. I've heard stories about the wall. Jeor let out a huff, but his eyes remained sharp. He was an old man, but not a fool. He was testing Aeron, pushing to see what he would reveal. Aeron knew better than to offer more than necessary. After a beat of silence, he added, I need to stop for a moment before we continue. You lot go ahead, I'll catch up. Gior narrowed his eyes slightly. The old bear wasn't one to trust easily, and Aeron could see the suspicion creeping into his expression. Finally, the Lord Commander shifted his gaze to Jon Snow, who had been quiet throughout the exchange. Stay with him, Gior ordered, his voice firm. Then he turned his sharp eyes back to Aeron. You don't mind, do you? Aeron's smirk didn't falter. Not at all. Jon gave a small nod, stepping closer, Ghost padding silently at his side. The direwolf's pale fur stood in stark contrast to the dark, frozen woods around them, his red eyes glowing like embers in the night. The Night's Watch began to move, gathering their gear and preparing to march toward Craster's Keep. Gior cast one last glance at Aeron before turning away, leading his men forward into the cold, leaving only the two of them behind. Jon adjusted Longclaw on his back, watching Aeron carefully. What is it you need to do? Aeron exhaled, glancing toward the distant treeline. Just something I have to check. Ghost let out a soft growl, his ears twitching as if sensing something unseen. Jon frowned. Let's make it quick, then. Aeron smirked again, stepping forward into the shadowed forest, Jon and Ghost following close behind. Aeron waited, his sharp eyes scanning the treeline, ensuring the rest of the Night's Watch had disappeared into the distance. The silence of the haunted forest wrapped around them like a living thing, thick and watchful. Satisfied, he turned to Jon, his purple eyes gleaming in the dim light. Don't be afraid, he said simply. Jon frowned, confused. Afraid of what? Before he could finish, the shadows around Aeron began to ripple. A chilling presence filled the air as dark figures emerged from the ground, twisting and reforming into the unmistakable shapes of armored warriors. Their glowing eyes flickered like embers, their weapons gleaming ominously under the pale light of the stars. Jon's reaction was instant. He took a step back, unsheathing Longclaw with a sharp rasp of steel. His grip tightened as his heartbeat thundered in his ears. Even Ghost, usually unshaken, lowered himself into a defensive stance, baring his teeth with a low, warning growl. By the gods, Jon breathed, his voice laced with disbelief. What is this? Aeron smirked, unfazed by the tension. He crossed his arms and let the shadows swirl around him like a living cloak. I told you not to worry, these are my servants. He glanced at Ghost and added, you too. Ghost didn't stop growling, his red eyes darting between the shadowy warriors, his fur bristling. Jon's gaze flickered between Aeron and the silent, kneeling figures. Servants. His voice held both panic and awe. You're saying these things serve you? That's right. Aeron's tone was casual, as if he were discussing the weather. And they're very loyal. Jon didn't lower his sword, but he didn't move, either. His mind was racing, struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. Aeron, unbothered by Jon's shock, lifted a hand. Go. Spread out. Search for the White Walkers. Do not venture too far, and return if you find anything. The shadows responded immediately, dispersing into the night like wraiths, vanishing between the trees. The eerie stillness of the forest returned, but the sense of unseen movement lingered. Only few remained. Garm and his wolves. The massive shadowed direwolf stood beside Aeron, its size dwarfing even Ghost. It was a hulking specter of darkness, its glowing blue eyes fixed on Aeron, awaiting his command. Jon, still gripping Longclaw, barely found his voice. What in the hell is that? Aeron smirked at his reaction. That's Garm. He's different from the rest. Jon looked between the two direwolves. Ghost remained on edge, his growl quieter now but still present, as if sensing that Garm was something unnatural. Aeron turned his attention back to the beast. You have a different task, he said, his voice cool and deliberate. Go north. There's a wildling homestead, Craster's Keep. Kill the man that lives there. Do not harm the women. Jon's eyes widened. Craster. Why? Aeron met Jon's gaze, his expression unreadable. I don't like that man. Jon swallowed hard, watching as Garm dipped his massive head in understanding before vanishing into the darkness. The night felt colder. Jon exhaled, still staring at Aeron as if trying to figure out exactly what kind of man or thing stood before him. If you like this story, check out my other stories. Shadow Monarch in DC. And if you wish to read more or simply support me, then check out my Patreon at. Web links. 14 comments, 0 votes.